Okay, so tonight's homework is on plotline. At the end of this presentation, you'll have a better idea of all the components of a plotline and how to write the written response on plotline for our next proficiency. So let's review the different components of a plotline. Notice the pencil in the corner. This means I do want you to write this down. So I would say go ahead and make this plotline mountain structure and then fill in the information as it comes on the screen. Don't forget the power of the pause button. Here we go. So the first part of a plotline is the exposition. This is the start of the story that introduces the characters and settings and potential conflicts. The next part is rising action. This makes up the bulk of the story, where the conflicts happen and the protagonist is tested. Finally, you have the climax, the most intense part of the story where the conflicts are at their worst and need to be resolved. This will take up most of the story, and then the rest will kind of resolve quickly, usually the last couple of pages of the story. But not all the time, most of the time though. Okay, next one is the falling action. This is where the events that lead to the story end. Everything's kind of, all the loose ends are tied up. And then you have the resolution. It's the end of the story, all the problems are potentially solved, and the story comes to a conclusion. So, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. It's important that you know all of these pieces because this is really great academic vocabulary for you to have. And I do think that on your official proficiency written response, I'm going to want you to identify these and use this academic vocabulary in the actual paragraph. Now, in addition to identifying the different events of the story, so what you would do is you'd to prepare for the written response is you draw this outline out. This is very simple. It's a tiny little almost triangle with the little boxes that signify the different pieces, identifying that academic vocabulary, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, and then identifying those events that actually happen in the story. Once you've accomplished all of that, the next piece is going to be to add dialogue right underneath each of those events. We're going to go over this in class, don't worry if we haven't already, but just get into the habit of going through this process and it will help the written response come much easier. Think of this as kind of your brainstorming. So you'll add a quote from the story that fits each event on the plotline, and this will end up being your textual evidence for the written response. All right, so how do we write the written response? Well, there's 5 steps that you're going to need to do to create it for the plotline written response. First, you're going to do topic sentence, name it, verb it, big picture. This is something you went over last year when you were learning how to write a summary and how to write a basic paragraph. This is your topic sentence, the first sentence of the paragraph. It introduces everything. We'll go over it on the next slide. Once you've done the topic sentence, you're going to identify an event in the plotline, label what part of the plotline that event is on, for example, exposition or rising action. Use that academic vocab. So you're going to identify an event in the story and label it as the part in the plotline that it actually occurs. Then you're going to write a quote or dialogue from the text that comes from that point in the plotline. So that's the part that you write underneath the event. Don't forget to cite that particular text or quote. And an example of that is the author's, parenthesis, then the author's last name, and then the page number from which you found it, and then a closing parenthesis and a period at the end. And then finally, to finish out the paragraph, you need to explain how that event and dialogue or textual support led to the next part of the plot. So, for example, you'll label or talk about the rising action of the story and use a quote from the story that is from that part of the story. And then you'll describe how that leads to the climax, because that's the next part of the plot line that comes. So explain how one event and dialogue lead to the next event on the plot line. And it doesn't matter which event you end up choosing. Maybe you choose the climax and you show how the climax leads to the ending of the story or the falling action. Or you could even talk about like falling action and resolution if you wanted to. But just show how one event leads to the other and how the dialogue helps support that. Okay, so a quick review of name it, verb it, big picture from last year. First of all, you have the name it. This is where you're going to give the title of the piece, the text, the book, whatever it happens to be that you're reading, and the author's name. Then you have the verb it section. This is where you carefully choose from a list of verbs. You're not limited to the list I give you or the poster that's here in the classroom. Those are just a start. You can get creative, but some sort of verb that lends itself to talking about the big picture piece. The big picture is where you state the theme in a piece of fiction. And it's sometimes going back to your plot line and looking at the word choice the author uses will help you identify the theme. Sometimes it's hard to do the big picture section, and it helps to do some of your brainstorming and processing first and then come back to this particular part. Theme looks different to each individual, so as long as you have some support on your theme, the textual evidence, the different quotes and things from the article or the text, then your theme will work. You just have to support your ideas. So here's a short list of verbs. I do want you to write them all down. Tells, shows, describes, explains, discusses, lists, explores, illustrates, teaches, compares. Don't ever use this article is about fill in the blank to just try and elevate your writing. There are some verbs that are much they're more educational sound. They're more academic sounding. So really try to go above and beyond from saying just is about or even tells. I think there's others that you could use like acknowledges or advises or assures us. Like those are all much larger sounding words. It just is going to elevate your writing. So really get creative and think about that verb. So let's look at an example. Let's pretend we read a story about someone experiencing a tornado. It's a short story called Take Cover. So what I always do when I try to develop these topic sentences is I make this quick little chart. I'm going to separate 3 different sections and I'm going to label it, name it, verb it, big picture, so that I know that I get all 3 parts in. So first of all, I need to name the story and the author. In the short story, Take Cover by Alexander Smith, the author vividly describes. See, I'm getting a little bit creative. Instead of just describes, I'm adding a different word in there to help the description. And then the big picture, the importance of being prepared for tornadoes to save your life and your family's life. So if we read it all together, this becomes one long topic sentence. In the short story, Take Cover by Alexander Smith, the author vividly describes the importance of being prepared for tornadoes to save your life and your family's life. So in the end, I've done all 3 components and I've created a really fantastic topic sentence. Now, it is important in the name it section that you try to tell us what type of text you've read, a short story, an article, a novel. Put that in there so that we can identify what it is that you're actually talking about. So the textual support, what is that? It's quotes from the text and it helps us elevate our writing and proves a point. It helps you to become more truthful or believable or supports your statements. How do you do this? Well, in fiction, you're going to use quotes from the text. It doesn't have to be just dialogue, but in this instance, for this one, we are focusing on dialogue for plot. And in nonfiction, it can be facts or quotes from the text. Don't forget to use the ICE technique. ICE means to introduce the quote, cite the quote, and then explain the quote. You don't want to just randomly have a quote hanging out in the paragraph. It needs to be integrated into everything else that you're saying. So by introducing the quote and then having the quote right after that, you've not left it hanging. It's not just randomly in there. You've introduced it. Citing the quote is really important so you're not plagiarizing. And then explaining the quote helps round us out and know why you in fact put that quote in the paragraph itself. So just remember ICE. Introduce, cite, explain. All right, you're finished. Don't forget to summarize the info from today. This really helps with your metacognition. And don't forget to ask a hot question. Even if you feel like you don't have a question at all, put your minds into a confused student and come up with a hot question. Use those hot question starters to get you there. Thanks, guys.